Okay.
Can anyone wants a Presto card? We've got one. Here's the name, so people why I can't make the rest of it. So, as you all know, the Innovation and Design Expo has been supported by IDEa Couture since the very beginning. They've been helping us out with our planning, our execution, and essentially they've been providing us with the materials and the resources to actually frame our thinking of design and how it can be used in different contexts. Our next keynote speaker is 100% perfect, if you agree with me. I'm joking, he's terrible at Monopoly, and he has no artistic skill whatsoever. But on that same note, he knows exactly how to be an artist in different contexts. He can take design and creative thinking and apply it to different fields, different areas of interest. And I think that's a very, very valuable quality to have, especially when you're working as an innovator. As I mentioned earlier before, being an innovator also means being able to see things in very multidisciplinary perspectives. You have to see it from all angles. And unless you can do that, your project, your idea, your initiative will end up failing. You can't be a forward thinker without diverting from that linear path. So our next keynote speaker, Saunderson, will basically be guiding you through his experiences with that. And I hope that you all take something very valuable from his keynote. And even though he is a terrible artist, he has a great mind and a great beard.
That's a big thing for being in design.
You have to have the beard. So I'll stop boosting your ego now. And you can go right ahead.
No, I mean, that was the perfect intro. Like, you've summed up pretty much my whole talk, and so I don't know why I stand up here for the next 25 minutes. Hi. First, thank you all for having me out and for sticking around. I know you guys are probably pretty exhausted. It sounds like it's been a pretty intense day, but I'm glad you're sticking around to the end. And hopefully I can keep us kind of engaged and alive here, and we can fight through and then get to the end of the day and relax a bit. So, yeah, it looks like you guys have had a lot of fun. I saw just a bit of the tail end of the Design Expo, but I know there's some other great speakers today you got to hear from. I'm going to be talking, I think this is hopefully a nice close because, I mean, ultimately my hope here is to have you guys walking out of here better armed to know how to use the skills that you have out in the real world. So ultimately how to get a job, which I know is a big stressful thing when you're in school. I think probably the number one thing on our minds that only increases as we get further and further along. But specifically I'm going to talk about design thinking and innovation and why these things are important in this day and age to some people and how you can kind of play a role within those worlds. So we're going to talk a bit about what this innovation word means in business because it is probably the most ill-defined word in the world right now. And we're going to sort of challenge some of the traditional definitions and maybe try to establish one or a few within this room. We're going to talk about what design in business means because I know a lot of you are coming from very creative backgrounds at the school and you're doing a lot of work in design, but you might not necessarily see while you're growing expertise within your area of creativity and your area of design, might not necessarily get to see where that fits into the bigger picture once you get out in the business world. And then lastly, we're going to use that to actually question the role that you can play. So we're going to say if these are the skills that you have now coming out of school and you don't necessarily want to do what's expected. If you're a creative writer and you don't want to just go out and write short stories, or if you're a graphic designer and you don't want to design posters for the rest of your life, how can you apply some of those skills in non-intuitive ways that maybe makes you happier and maybe has you doing something that you never even thought of? So, first, who the heck is this guy? I know some of you are probably wondering the big question that's on everyone's mind is, how come he doesn't look much like the guy on the poster? And I guess this is Idris Muti, our CEO, and I'd like you, implore me if you will, to think of me as his younger and more attractive brother, albeit probably a little less successful, a lot poorer. He can grow a great beard though, so I've got that going for me. But no, Idris was in Europe this weekend, so he asked if I'd come out and talk to you guys. Because the two of us have done a lot of talks together, and apparently he trusts me, so. Joke's on him. But yeah, the thing that we have in common is this place called IDEa Couture. IDEa Couture is a strategic innovation and experience design consultancy. That's always such a mouthful. That's our boilerplate, and that's kind of how we pitch ourselves. What that means, big mouthful, that essentially says we work with Fortune 500 companies and we help them do the things that they really suck at. A lot of these big businesses have been operating for decades now, and they've been really, really good at knowing what they do, bottling water or making stress balls or doing one thing really well, and they've optimized that to boot. The problem is the moment that people decide, okay, that was a terrible example, now water. The moment people decide they don't want to drink water anymore, they don't care about stress balls, what do they do? So we help companies think of what the next big thing is going to be for them. What is their next product or service or their next move? Because for a lot of these companies, they've just been doing the same thing over and over again. And they need some help kind of breaking out of that mold. So this is a bit about me. I always love this one because you never know how the hell to look at it, and so I actually have to guide you through it. I actually grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere in Manitoba. But 500 people, 2,000 acres, wheat, all that fun. And it was probably around the time I was 15, 16 that I started piecing together that the farm life wasn't quite for me. I had a really inquisitive mind, and it seemed everything my dad wanted me to do on the farm, if he said, okay, here's the tractor, we're gonna go out and learn how to work the field today, I'd say, cool, I'm gonna take apart the tractor and figure out how the tractor works. Or, here we gotta go build this thing out of some wood, and I'm gonna say, cool, I'm gonna figure out carpentry. Or he's gonna say, here, this is a field of corn, I want you to, figure out how to tend for it. And I said, cool, I'm gonna figure out how to start selling corn to the entire town and make a lot of money and go to university. So his plan kind of backfired, but he instilled a lot of cool values in me, just they didn't really end up being for farming. I decided through some weird twist of events to end up going to Montreal, and I took engineering at McGill. That was my kind of first life, and that was probably the biggest influence on how I think, is actually the engineering discipline. While there, I was in mechanical engineering, but I very quickly got involved with a place called the Ambulatory Robotics Lab, so the legged robot lab. We used to build these little things that scurried around, and it was great. We'd be walking on campus, and people would always wonder what they were. But then when you get out of university, you realize the only people who are interested in that kind of stuff are the military. And I had a bit of a soul and a conscience, so I decided not to go that way. Instead, I used some of that knowledge that I had to look at where robotics could be applied elsewhere. So I started a few businesses, and we made industrial automation systems, toys for some companies, and we actually made one of those. We were one of the first ones to design, those like the red box, the DVD machines. We designed one of those. We made them before anyone was making those, but we had no idea how to run a business, so that went bankrupt. Soon after that, I went to the UK. I was working there for about 3 years with another company doing inkjets, building printers, and eventually big automation machines. But it kind of wasn't for me, so I finally ended up in Toronto about 5 or 6 years ago. And when I started in Toronto, I started doing just some consulting engineering work, and it was starting to get a little old for me. I started to realize that I had bigger ambitions, wanted to do something a little different. And I'd run enough businesses and failed them that I figured, well, I obviously need to learn a bit more about this business stuff. So I actually went and I did an MBA at Ted Rogers School of Management, and through that started to open my perspective. I wouldn't say that I came out of engineering as an engineer. I wouldn't say that I came out of business as a businessman, because I think while it was an interesting set of tools and perspectives that I learned, I was very skeptical of all of them. And I had a big struggle actually coming out of that when I was looking for jobs. And initially almost took a job with some more traditional banks or like big old school consulting firms, and none of them ever really felt right. Until one night I was out and I ran into this guy, Scott, who's one of our partners. And through a series and combination of whiskey, discussions about rock and roll, and calling him an asshole, he somehow decided it was a good idea to offer me a job. And suddenly I'm working at this place called IDEx, and I have no idea about what this design thinking stuff is, about how this all makes sense and how this all works together. But for the last 4 years I've been working in this space with all kinds of clients and learning about what design thinking is and applying it to businesses, but also coming out and giving talks to people like you who want to learn a bit more about how this all fits in the business world, and hopefully something that can help guide your careers and your lives. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. Second big question is, what is this innovation business that we talk about? So right now my job title is actually the head of health technology. I struggle with that because if anyone ever comes and swings by IC and talks to us, you'll realize that job titles don't really have much of a meaning, so it's more for the outside world. But before that, actually, my job title was Senior Innovation Strategist. Try explaining that one to your foreign parents. And I always hated introducing, when people would ask, like, oh, what do you do for a living? And I'd be like, I'm an innovation strategist. Because innovation has become this word that just, doesn't mean much. Everyone talks about it and they want to use it in their business and they say, oh, we want to innovate on our business model, we want to innovate on our products, we want to innovate on our services. And then you ask them, okay, cool, what does innovation mean? I'll ask that to my clients a lot. And they'll say, well, it's doing things differently. It's trying to change what we do. And no one ever seems to really have a good answer. So I think a good place to start is first to actually build an answer for this. So what about you guys? How would you define innovation? Anyone? Yeah?
Improving things?
Improving things, yeah. Who do you guys see as innovative? Any companies or people or, yeah?
Google, Facebook, degree.
Yeah? Yeah?
XR?
Yeah? Jobs.
Apple.
Apple's, I was fishing there. Apple's the one I was to. This is actually what, even there, you heard Google, Pixar, Apple. That's what a lot of people think of when they think of innovation. They think that it has to be something involving, cool new products, often very technology focused, and something that kind of feels different. It's new, it's improving on the past. And so that's kind of where we lock in. But then beyond that, we don't really dig much deeper. In fact, I see innovation, while I kind of hate the word, I see it as a very multifaceted word. Because for us, there's a lot of different types. There's applied innovation, which is probably more similar to the Apple perspective. And this is where you're sort of thinking about new products and you're figuring out how you can improve on them or even like completely disrupt them and make entirely new things. So this one was actually one of my first projects at IDEx. I was working with a health insurance company in the US, and they approached us saying, we want to use, at the time those pedometers were just those little things. They were like, we want to make something really cool. We want to make a pedometer that somehow we integrate into your insurance and it'll reduce your premium, which is now actually getting to be a fairly well-known thing, although there's some ethical issues there. But 4 years ago, this was pretty new to them. Experience design is another thing a lot of people don't initially jump on when they think of innovation, but generating things like new services, or someone designed this room. I'm sure a lot of you hate this room because of some of the lectures that you've sat through, but someone designed this room and they thought about what the experience of sitting in this room is, right from the lighting all the way down to the chairs, all the way down to how the sound and acoustics carries in here. That's all a consideration. Organizational change, another thing you might not initially sort of run through when you think of the word innovation, but something that we do. We'll go to work. This was actually a workshop that we ran with a bunch of senior executives at Cisco, the people who make like conferencing technology. And it was getting to know and understand their culture so that we could actually help change their culture and how they work as a business, and in the hope that that would trickle down. Specifically here, Cisco was an organization that focused too much on their own technology and not enough on the people that they're actually serving. So we wanted to try and shift their perception of how they do work so that they focus more on the end user. Even process improvement, as bland and dull as that sounds, this was one that we did with Nestle, their seasonal confectionery group, which is basically a mumbo jumbo for the guys that make Halloween cake. And they had a whole process on, we got to think of new products, design, some ghost stuff, prototype, test it, and get all the way to market. And they were getting stale. They needed to even rethink how they went around their entire process of coming up with new Halloween or Easter or Christmas candy. And so something like that is actually process innovation, two words you never thought might be together, but is a really important thing. So my point there was really like, innovation can be a lot of different things to different people, and it can also even cover a lot of different spectrums of how far you want to go. The more traditional words that people are probably comfortable with are like incremental and breakthrough or disruptive innovation. And you can kind of see here, we'll typically put this up in front of a client at the start of an engagement and say, where do you want to go? Are you really trying to just do something new in the next 6 months, or are you fundamentally talking about this sort of radical out there 5 to 10 year stuff where you are ready to pivot and change your entire business and even depart from your industry? It's good to establish that, but that's what a lot of people don't necessarily think of. When they think of innovation, they just think, okay, we're Apple, we're gonna make a new phone, or we're Google, we're gonna design a new web service. But in fact, it can cover a lot of different things. So now that I've even further muddied the definition of the word innovation, we're gonna move on from there. I at least hope that while we don't necessarily have a perfect understanding of the word, you guys get that it's complex, it's difficult to deal with, and we're going to ask the question of, so why do we actually care? Why do we think innovation needs to be a word that exists at all? Why do businesses care about that now? There's a big reality that you guys will start to touch on as you go out and you start looking for jobs and you start having these interviews and you start using, interview apps that help you out along the way. And the scary reality is that while we'd all love to believe that a lot of these businesses, and this isn't, wholesale, this isn't everyone, but while you love to believe a lot of these businesses are hiring you because you're, just clever as all hell and you're someone that's going to come in and change the world and change their industry and change their business. The reality is a lot of these businesses are hiring because you are just another piece that fits into the machine. You are something that they can put into a role and you will do that role. And that's kind of scary because essentially that's saying that then that trickles all the way back to our education. And in many ways, our education trains us all the same way. This is a slide I often use when I give talks like this to a group of MBAs or a group of BComs. And the scary thing though is I was thinking about this on my drive over today. This still applies though, even to a design school. So it's not a bad thing, but it's a reality. It's that whether you're an engineer, a business person, a creative writer, a graphic designer, or anything else in between, you are trained with a certain perspective. And that's not a bad thing, but the reality is that when a business is built only around one or two perspectives, then that's where things start to get dangerous. So when you look at a lot of these Fortune 500 companies, and everyone at the top is, well, they graduated from this school with this degree, and that's how they tend to operate, it gives a very narrow perspective on what their business can do. In the same way that, if a group of purely one type of designer got together and created a business, they run the risk of kind of having groupthink. So, just like that, companies that start to build too siloed a perspective, they actually create these very stuffy environments that if you try to come in as a unique person or a different person and change things up, you're going to hit a lot of resistance, you'll get frustrated, or you may even get fired because you just don't work out. And the problem is, though, they build these massive walls and these, jail lenses of how they want to operate, but it doesn't always work out. And I think we've started to see more than enough examples in the last 10 or 20 years of companies like Blockbuster that got blindsided by Netflix, like Kodak 20, 30 years ago that had the patent for the digital camera in their hands and decided not to do anything with it because they thought, no, we don't want to disrupt our little film and our printing industry here. We won't do that. And now, how are they doing? So a lot of these companies have an imperative to start taking on a different perspective. Because if we don't learn this kind of thinking, then we'll get stuck. 100 years ago, a company could design a new product every 20 years, and that was totally fine. They could sell it, and that was all they needed, and maybe they make some improvements and tweaks, but that was it. 50 years ago, it was maybe every 10 years. 20 years ago, it was maybe every 5. In the last 5 or 10 years, it's maybe gotten down to 2. I remember when cell phone companies were first starting to put out like their new models, it'd be every couple of years. Now it's every year, or even every 6 months, and we're accelerating the pace of change. And so now we can't operate businesses like we used to. And that's where these different perspectives and a lot of the design thinking stuff comes in. So our job, and what I'm trying to push you guys on today, is that we actually want to design better businesses. We want to use the principles of how you guys think and what you've learned in this